Welcome back. It is that time. Today I'd like to go over my top 10 films of 2023. I know pretty much everyone has kind of got their top 10 lists out at this point. We're pretty much a week into the new year. But like I said in my last video, I wanted to kind of push this list a couple more days. I wanted to give myself a little bit more time to try and see if I couldn't sneak in, a couple more movies that potentially could crack my top 10. But with that being said, I still on Letterboxd I have my 2023 movies ranked list, and I think that I'm at 172 as of this recording of films from 2023. So even though there's still a couple that I wish I could have gotten to, I still think I have a wide enough of a pool to choose from that I could, get a good list going. But with that said, I do want to mention that there are 5 films that I want to kind of give a shout out to that I just haven't been able to see yet, and it's mainly just because these films haven't had a wide release yet. They're kind of some festival films that, actual critics and other people were able to see last year, and some of them they were playing in like select cinemas, and kind of had a limited release, but they just haven't had their wide release yet. But of these 5 films, I think all 5 of them actually are within the next couple months. I think they do get those wide releases, so I will see them all soon, and we'll see, where they fall in the list. But those 5 films that I want to give a mention to that I just unfortunately unable to see yet, it is The Zone of Interest, American Fiction, All of Us Strangers, Origin, and Society of the Snow. I do believe Society of the Snow actually just dropped on Netflix the last couple days. Just I didn't get the chance to see it yet, so hopefully in the next day or two I can check that one off. But then the other 4 for sure within the next couple months, once they get that wide theatrical or streaming release, I'll be able to catch those, and again we'll see where they fall on my list. And that brings me to another point that I want to mention before we get really going into this. It's kind of the philosophy, or I guess the idea of how people do these lists. I've got a really good buddy who, when he publishes his kind of top 10 lists, whether that just be on Letterboxd or he's written for some film publications before, so the way he always does it with his top 10 lists is when he makes that list, as soon as it's published, that's final. Like that was his list. He doesn't change it because he likes to use it as kind of like a time capsule, in a sense that he loves to be able to go back, 10 years from now, he'd love to go back and look at 2023 and see where films are ranked and have that reflection of like that's who I was back in 2023. And so I get that if that's the way that you do your lists. I don't do it that way. I'm very much constantly changing and evolving my lists, and I think that's in large part just because I'm constantly changing and evolving as a person. Who I was 5 years ago when I watched a film isn't who I am now watching a movie, and so I'm constantly just moving and tinkering lists. And so, I mean, for example, just in prep for Maestro last month, or a couple months ago, I watched A Star Is Born again, and it hit me a lot harder than it did back then. I remember liking it back then, but so that moved up my 2018 ranked list a lot. And then just in the last month, Rocket Man was a film that I loved back in 2019. It was like right outside my top 10. I just rewatched it, so I moved that up into my top 10. And the big one was a couple weeks ago, I rewatched Little Women, Greta Gerwig, 2019 film, and I think that was maybe the 7th, 8th, 9th time I've seen Little Women, and I have always had it as my number 2 film of 2019, and just something different hit a couple weeks ago when I watched it, and so I finally made that decision, and we'll see if it sticks. I might switch it again later, but I made that decision. I moved it over Parasite as my favorite film of 2019. There was just something about that last rewatch of Little Women that that's just the way that I kind of like interpret film, is the way that I interpret art, if you will. It depends on like the mood you're in when you're watching it, or just kind of the person you are. You can kind of interpret things differently, and so that's the way that I'm kind of viewing, that I view my list, is it's constantly evolving, it's constantly changing. So this list, these top 10 that I'm going to give you now, it's very possible, for sure in a couple years it's going to be different. It's very possible in a couple weeks I'll rewatch a film and it'll move up, and so for that reason, because there's so many films, especially this year in 2023, there were so many good good movies on the year. So I have a long list of honorable mentions that I want to get to. Quickly, just read off 20 different honorable mentions that just fell outside of my top 10. But given a lot of these I've only seen one time, so with a lot of them, given additional rewatches, they all have a very good chance of maybe not quite cracking into the top 10, but have a really good chance of moving up in my rankings. So just really quickly, here are those 20 honorable mentions: The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, The Boy and the Heron, Priscilla, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, When Evil Lurks, The Killer, May December, Polite Society, Wonka, Saw 10, Blackberry, Air, Bottoms, Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves, Rye Lane, Godzilla Minus One, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and Anatomy of a Fall. So those are my honorable mentions. With that said, let's get into the top 10. As of today, again, we'll see how long this stays the top 10, but my number 10 favorite film of the year was Talk to Me. Talk to Me was a film that I hadn't heard a whole lot about. Really knew nothing about it until I want to say was Talk to Me. I think Sundance. When it first came out. At the film festival, there obviously was a lot of hype about it, and then when it came out in that, I believe in the summertime, it was kind of almost still a little quiet. There's not a lot of like word of mouth, just like in real life. Obviously online, a lot of people were really hyping it, so I was excited to go see it, and I loved it. I've mentioned before on this channel that kind of like comedy and horror were kind of the only genres I ever really watched, until I got really big into movies. And so there's something about any time that there's a good comedy or a good horror that I love it. It's just because I've seen so many bad comedies and bad horrors that when you can craft and make a good one, like Talk to Me was this year, it just really stands out as a top film of the year. And another thing that you're gonna hear me say a lot on this channel is I really love when a movie nails the ending, whether it be the final shot or just kind of the final scene. If a movie can just like nail that ending and give you such a good ending to a story, it instantly just elevates it like an entire tier in my brain. And I loved the ending to Talk to Me. I thought it was very well done. It kind of wrapped up our main character's art very well, and kind of her story, and it was a bold kind of way to end that story. So I really loved Talk to Me. My number 9 favorite film of the year was Poor Things. One of those that, like, once I had heard a lot of the rave reviews coming out of the film festival circuit for it, I I knew that. I was already going to see it. Whenever a Yorgos Lanthimos film comes out, like, obviously it's going to be, I'm going to go see it. But so once I'd heard all the rave reviews, I kind of tuned it out. I had no idea what I was going into with Poor Things. I'd heard some things about, not necessarily specific scenes, but the content. I knew that there was a lot of sexual content, and I knew that was kind of a discussion point. But the thing that really blew my mind with Poor Things was how much, just like a coming of age, like a coming of age story that is, and that's a theme you're going to hear me also mention a lot on this channel is I love coming of age stories, and that was Bella Baxter's whole journey in Poor Things. That coming of age element was something that just really kind of blew me away, and I wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready for that. I was kind of going in thinking I was going to get some shock movie, that there was just going to be a lot of shocking scenes, but I wasn't quite prepared for the emotional journey that was gonna take place. And so that's why Poor Things, and obviously Yorgos Lanthimos, the direction, the art design, the cinematography, the production design, especially everything, it was beautiful. And then obviously you got to mention Emma Stone and Mark Ruffalo, Willem Dafoe. Just great performances from everyone involved. So Poor Things is my number 9. My number 8 favorite film of the year is, maybe when I look at this list, is the one that shocks me the most. Like, I'm surprised that a couple months ago, I would have had no idea that this would have cracked my top 10. But my number 8 favorite film of the year is The Iron Claw. It was a film that I didn't really know a whole lot about. Obviously, I knew it was about wrestling, but I wasn't like I'm not like a wrestling fan, and I don't really, I never really got the appeal. It just wasn't, wrestling just isn't my thing. And I totally get it that there is for a lot of people. So I just wasn't super excited for it. And then, also, it's crazy because, how much I love sports. Sports movies aren't always my favorite. I think sports movies can sometimes kind of fall into that trap of kind of the same thing that like superhero movies can, where sometimes they kind of feel copy and paste, and it's super predictable, and you know the story, you know what's going to happen, and so I just think all of those factors were kind of going into the Iron Claw, and I just wasn't anticipating it as much as I should have been, because I was absolutely blown away by the Iron Claw. And it's one of those films that if you're not a fan of wrestling, or if you're not even a fan of sports, you're fine. Go see it, because sure, it is a sports movie, but first and foremost, it's a good drama, and it's a film that will really impact you. It'll really make you feel, and that was the thing that blew me away. And as I was watching it for the majority of the film, I was just like, this is really good. I like this, and I knew it was probably gonna. In my head, as I'm watching it, I'm thinking this is gonna be in my honorable mention kind of tier. Like it's that good that it deserves that mention. But I was like, I don't necessarily love this. And then I'm not going to spoil any of these movies on my top 10 list, especially The Iron Claw, since it's still in theaters right now, and I know there's probably a lot of people that haven't had the opportunity to see it yet. Um, but The Iron Claw, it went from just being a good movie till the last couple scenes of the film. Jeremy Allen White's last scene, and then Zac Efron's final scene of the film. Those last two moments just broke me, and those were those two scenes that just instantly elevated it from a movie that I liked to a movie that I loved, and I knew it had to be in my top 10 of the year. My number 7 favorite movie of the year is Killers of the Flower Moon. Uh, Killers of the Flower Moon, obviously super anticipating it anytime Martin Scorsese has a new film coming out. It's going to be high on my list of wanting to go see it. And what was so cool with Killers of the Flower Moon is a lot of the talk from people, especially from people who hadn't seen it, and before the film came out, a lot of the talk for Killers of the Flower Moon was about the runtime, over 3 hours. And I remember when I went and saw it, I was after work one day, just went over, so it was already kind of late at night, and I knew it was going to be a long movie, and so it was going to be really really late when the film was done. So I kind of went in thinking like, oh, like hopefully I really hope this is good, because to make that commitment of over 3 hours, it is a commitment for someone to go to the theater and spend that time there. And obviously, I don't know why I was doubting Martin Scorsese. Obviously, the runtime is totally fine for Killers of the Flower Moon, and that's one thing the way I kind of view runtimes is, some people maybe talk about, does a film need to be that long? And the way I view it is, a film can be however long or however short it wants to be, as long as it's serving a purpose, and as long as you know you're just not completely bored, and it's just not, a film can be however long it needs to be, and this is how long Martin Scorsese needed Killers of the Flower Moon to be. And it was great. Obviously, Lily Gladstone, Leonardo DiCaprio, you get Robert De Niro, and then two 2.5 hours, however long it is, into the movie, when Jesse Plemons shows up. Obviously, all turn in great performances. The visuals of the film, the sound, was all very good, and this plus another film that's coming up a little bit later, another long film. They were films that, even though they were long, and even though I could feel the runtime, I was just captivated the entire time. And so, Killers of the Flower Moon makes my list. Number 6 favorite film of the year is John Wick Chapter 4. Speaking of long films, this was very long compared, I think, to the other films. That I want to say, I should have looked this up before. I want to say John Wick Chapter 3 is probably, 2 hours and 15 minutes or something, and then John Wick 4 is getting, pushing that 3 hour mark. I don't think it's quite that long, but it's pushing it. But it's just a beautiful conclusion to the John Wick story. The first 3 films were building and building to this moment, to John Wick Chapter 4. And, obviously there's kind of rumors that there might be a John Wick 5, so who knows if this is actually the conclusion. But for the first time, I think that this film kind of reaches a moment of we're kind of wrapping up the chaos of the first three John Wick stories, and so for the first time, there's not necessarily that like it doesn't end on a cliffhanger or end on this like note of oh my gosh what is going to happen next. I think this one ends on a beautiful note that kind of wraps up a lot of the story, and so if you're a fan of the first three, it's hard to watch this one and not instantly love John Wick Chapter 4 as well. The stunt choreography, a lot is said about Keanu's acting ability, but I think he serves this role very well, and the film also does a great job of bringing in a lot of other characters to bounce off of kind of that stoic John Wick, that Keanu Reeves performance, and it all just works very well. If you're into stylish, sleek action films, the John Wick universe is just about as good as it gets, and so John Wick 4 deserves its spot here. My number 5 favorite film of the year was The Holdovers. Um, the Holdovers was another film that I wasn't really anticipating a whole ton prior to this year. Um, I hadn't seen any Alexander Payne films before. I recently went back and watched Sideways, and I really liked that, and that was one of the first times that I think I've really seen kind of Paul Giamatti in like the lead, starring role. I just hadn't really watched a lot of Paul Giamatti films either, and so The Holdovers just completely caught me off guard again by how kind of how touching and how um, just emotional it made me, especially obviously toward the end. Paul Giamatti obviously delivers just a phenomenal performance, and Divine Joy Randolph as well. She's very much in kind of that Oscar buzz. So you get two great performances. Dominic Sessa, it's unfortunate. I believe today the BAFTA nominations or the long list came out for the BAFTA, and I think Dominic Sessa made that long list, and so that's the first time, kind of some positive momentum for him in the awards race. But he obviously turns out a great performance, and I just the thing with the Holdovers that really got to me is there's a couple moments. There's, if you've seen the film, kind of the Christmas party scene where Paul Giamatti kind of has his character has a moment that really hit me, and then toward the end of the film, obviously there's kind of the big climactic moment right at the end. Those two scenes were just very emotional, and they hit me on a level, and that's kind of a theme for what makes a film crack my top 10 is it has to hit me in the right way. And The Holdovers completely it is another film that caught me off guard. I kind of was almost anticipating going into this film not like loving it, thinking I wasn't going to love it as much, but I mean, it's an instant, just almost an instant like Christmas classic, and it's just the everything about just the performances, the direction, the style of it. It's very stylish, in the sense of it feels like that period, kind of a period piece. It feels like that, and it's just all around a great film. If you haven't seen The Holdovers, I know some people probably haven't even heard about it. It's possibly one of those films where if you're not like very into movies, that it could have just completely gone under the radar for you. So I recommend checking out The Holdovers. My number 4 favorite film of the year, you've definitely heard about it. It is Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was another one that I kind of was going into thinking like a biopic, a 3 hour long biopic. I thought, it was going to be a good film, but I didn't know if it was going to be one of those that like I love. I thought it was going to be a film that I could respect and I could understand. It's going to win X amount of Oscars because of all the technical stuff and all of that. But I just didn't know if I was going to love it the way that I did, and I truly just loved it. The thing with Oppenheimer, I kind of was mentioning this with Killers of the Flower Moon. The thing with Oppenheimer is, yeah, it's 3 hours long, right? But and another thing too is there's kind of this commentary with runtimes of, yeah, it's 3 hours, but it didn't feel like it was 3 hours. For me, Oppenheimer felt like it was 3 hours, like, and that's like good because it was 3 hours. I was entertained all 3 hours, even though I could feel that length, especially when you get into that third hour where it kind of shifts into almost like a, not really a different story. It's the same story, obviously, but just a different style of story, a different, like, we're tagging this more as kind of, now it's a courtroom drama type thing. It still was, I was still captivated and I was still engaged. I was still hooked. And in order, to do that for 3 hours it's incredible. And obviously, the star of the film obviously is Christopher Nolan and his style, and the way that he does kind of the, not not multiple timelines, but the differing perspectives and how they're kind of clashing with each other, and then obviously all of the performances from Cillian Murphy to Robert Downey Jr. to Emily Blunt to Florence Pugh, in her, kind of a little bit smaller than I think a lot of people were expecting her role, and then just everyone else. It's just it's such a long list. You could sit here for 15 minutes just rattling off the cast of Oppenheimer, and they all deliver in their scenes. Like, obviously, now that I mentioned, I got to give, like, Alden Ehrenreich, his yeah, his props for, the way that his performance of bouncing off of Robert Downey Jr.'s character. It's just, there were so many elements of Oppenheimer all came together. It just kind of created just an intense and very just captivating 3 hour experience, and seeing it in IMAX was incredible. And I'm very looking forward to another rewatch. It's unfortunately I've only seen it the one time, so it's another film that, yeah, I'm dying to get that second rewatch in, for Oppenheimer. My number three favorite film of the year is the other half of the summer uh, event, at the cinemas. It was Barbie. Barbie is a film that I knew I was going to like. I knew I was anticipating. It was my most anticipated film of 2023, solely for Greta Gerwig. Anything that she does, I will go see. I mean, I've just mentioned at the beginning of this video how much I love Little Women, so it's just anything that Greta Gerwig does, I'm gonna go see, and I know I'm gonna like it. And so that's kind of how I felt with Barbie. Is I was like, maybe I'm not gonna love it. It's probably not gonna be my favorite of the year, but I was still anticipating it the most, just because I was excited to see what Greta Gerwig could do with, the Barbie property. And again, continuing the theme of what made my top 10 is, if it caught me off guard by how much it impacted me, how touched I was, by the story. I was not anticipating a movie about Barbie to be so, to just be deep, and to be, thoughts of, who we are, what our purpose is, kind of those existential questions. And so it was really cool to have this experience, especially in a sold out theater, when you're watching it Barbenheimer weekend. Of the people that it almost felt like there was so many people in the theater that also, like, I mean, at least I kind of knew, because I'd seen the trailer and I'd heard about the script that Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach were writing. But I think a lot of people, my buddy that I went and saw it with especially, he just thought it was going to be, Transformers, like that style of, here's a toy, here's a story about said toy. He didn't realize that he was going into, something so cinematic, something so deep, and with Barbie as, the main character. And so Barbie's another one I could spend another 15 minutes just rattling off the cast, between Margot, America Ferrera, obviously Ryan Gosling. There's so many different characters that all have these big moments, and then obviously there's also a million other people that kind of have, a couple scenes here or there that play a big have a big impact in the story as well. And everyone, just there's maybe one performance that I didn't love as much, one character, but everyone, just, they all kind of come together, and it's this great, this great cast, this great group, all come together, and it just, with the direction and the production design, all those elements, it made Barbie this event that I don't think a lot of people were expecting, and I loved it. So it makes my number three. My number two favorite film of the year is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. This one I knew, I believe Into the Spider-Verse is my favorite film of 2018, I think, is when that one came out. So I knew I was going to love it. I knew I was going to be into it. I did know going in that it was a part one. I think that's the big discussion with Spider-Verse, that a lot of people don't. I didn't know if that it was a part one. And so I was expecting it to kind of leave on some sort of cliffhanger, and I get that that cliffhanger is still kind of a moment or a piece of discussion that a lot of people have of the reason that they don't love it as much is because they don't think it's a complete movie. And sure, I do get that there's kind of part of that element of when you're viewing it as Spot is the villain, where he just kind of leaves and then that gets unresolved and then it ends on this cliffhanger. I get the idea of where people think that they didn't get a full story, but for Across the Spider Verse, for me, especially on the second viewing, the first viewing, I'm just absorbing it all. But the second viewing, you're kind of watching it a little bit closer. And on that second viewing, I very much just kind of realized that the story, this movie, it's Gwen and it's Miles and it's them just kind of the what I was just mentioning with Barbie. It's them kind of discovering their purpose and who they are. The movie opens with Gwen Stacy's monologue about trying to find her band, trying to find her group, and then the movie ends with her in her band, her group. So it's one of those where there's a full character arc there for her. Same thing with Miles. He's trying to kind of understand his role as a Spider-Man, amongst all of the Peter Parkers. Kind of where his place is. And so I think if you view this movie as more of just like a personal journey for them that doesn't necessarily have that big conclusion, I still think that you're getting a full story in this movie. And sure, it is part of a bigger story, so that makes me even more excited for Beyond the Spider-Verse, whenever that comes out. But I think you combine, for me, I felt like I got a full story, and so you combine that with the beautiful animation and just it's you can't just say beautiful animation because a lot of animated films are beautiful. This is a next level of beautiful and just breathtaking. The animation, it's the type of film that it's just 50 plus times in the film you could just honestly maybe even more just at any given random second you could just like take a screenshot of the film and it would just be a picture that you could hang on your wall. That's how like beautiful and breathtaking all the details are, and there's so many moments in the film that it just it was just stunning. And I think the people that don't think it's a complete film, they still have a lot of people rank it very high. They still acknowledge that it is for what it is. It is beautiful, but when you put that with, for me, where I feel like I got a full complete story out of it as well, you put them both together, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, it goes all the way up to my number 2 favorite film of the year, for that reason. And the moment you've been waiting for, my number 1 favorite film of the year was Past Lives. This was a film that I was anticipating quite a bit, and I knew it was going to be not a tough watch, but I knew it was going to be emotional. I knew it was going to be um, potentially a hard watch at moments just because of how emotional it could get. And then there was still a lot of the film I was kind of watching this dynamic between kind of our three lead characters, kind of toward the end of the film, the relationships that the three of them are forming with each other. And I remember watching it thinking like, oh, this is beautiful and it's very personal, it's intimate, but I wasn't like, it hadn't hit me emotionally yet. Um, but then there's one line kind of at the restaurant scene, at like that bar. There's one line that's said there that was kind of the first one that as soon as it was said, it kind of like hit me where I was like, oh, like that like hurts, when you hear that. And then there's the next scene, kind of the end. Again, I mentioned it earlier with Talk to Me, that any movie that nails the ending, it just instantly propels it, and that's where Past Lives was, where it was a good film. I really liked it, and then that line at the bar, again, I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm not going to say anything about what specific line, but if you've seen the film, you probably know what line I'm talking about. And then the final scene, there's a beautiful editing choice, where our characters are in a place. Again, I don't want to like really say anything, and there's a split second decision to edit in a shot from earlier in the film, kind of a callback to an earlier shot in the film. And that simple editing choice, like, that was the moment that broke me in the theater, where I wasn't as emotionally moved as I thought I was going to be, and then it hit so fast at the end of the film. Just broke me. Past Lives, just beautiful. Greta Lee, an excellent lead performance, and I really hope that, I know she's kind of on the edge of maybe getting nominated at the Oscars. I really hope she can pull through. And Celine Song, it's another one of those films where I love this so much that anything Celine Song makes going forward, it's going to be one of my most anticipated films, of whatever year that is, and that's just how it is. Like, if you're able to make a piece as moving as this, as Past Lives was for me, that's enough for me to just to follow your career, And so that's it. That's my top 10 favorite films of 2023. Again, we'll see in a couple weeks, we'll see in a couple years, where things move. A lot of these films, I've only seen one time, because I do watch so many movies in a year. I'll probably the last 2 years I've watched a movie a day. So for the last 2 years, the 365 films, I'm trying it again this year to see if I can do 3 years in a row. So because I watch so many different movies, sometimes it's hard to get multiple rewatches in on a lot of these movies. So the majority of the movies here, I've only seen one time. A couple of them two, but we'll see in the next little bit. I'm gonna start getting some rewatches of these in this year, especially all of the ones that are Oscar players. I'll rewatch all the Oscar films before the Academy Awards, and so it'll be exciting to see kind of how these films, the rankings, how it changes, how I feel, because again, it's just I feel like movies and film are so subjective from person to person, and it depends on kind of the mood you're in when you're watching a film sometimes, where it ranks. So we'll see in the next little bit how this changes. Let me know down in the comments if there's any films that I didn't mention, any of your favorite films of the year, and if you have any, if you want to drop your own top 10 lists of 2023, feel free to do that down in the comments, and again, have a nice discussion. Again, film is subjective, so your list may be completely different than mine, and that's okay. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys if you have any other films that you want to mention. And I know we're a week into the new year, but again, hope you're having a great start to the new year, and hope that as the year continues to go on, that you continue to meet your resolutions, and that's it for today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.